This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
What's happening, people? I usually don't do cold opens like this, but I think this is one of those shows where it's worth breaking from the formula. I've done these occasionally where I'll take a minute to recognize some of the recent wrestling passings. I did a tribute to Scott Hall last year when he passed away. I did one for Jay Briscoe earlier this year. And obviously I'm a little late to the party with this one, but I did want to take a moment here to talk about Terry Funk. That news broke about a day or two ago, and I found out about it probably yesterday afternoon, early evening. I just haven't been online all that much in the last couple days, so I only really found out about it within the last day or so. It sounded like it was pretty sudden, although I think some people are well aware of the health complications he'd been dealing with for a while. His dementia diagnosis in the last couple years probably facilitated a lot of what happened. Since I found out about it, and I double-checked this morning right before I sat down to start recording, I haven't really seen any follow-up with cause of death or any details about what exactly happened. Like I said, he was in assisted living for the last couple years. Sounded like he was mobile and able to do basic things, but I mean, dementia has varying effects on people depending on how severe it is. So we'll probably find out within the next few weeks what exactly happened. Obviously I can sit here and give you a 40-minute dissertation on the career highlights of Terry, but I'm not going to do that. I mean, you're going to have plenty of experts go through all that on their podcast this week. I just wanted to take a moment to chime in and share some of my earliest memories of Terry Funk. I'm a late bloomer, unfortunately, so I missed a lot of the peak years of Terry going back to his run in the 70s. The NWA World title run in Florida, the stuff with him and his brother Dory. Man, I don't even really have a lot of memories of his early run from the WWF in like 85. I mean, I think the only footage I ever recall from memory was the stuff with him and JYD in the build-up to WrestleMania 2. But even a lot of that stuff is kind of grainy. For me, if you ask me, like, what's your most vivid memory of Terry Funk, it's got to be the feud with him and Ric Flair from 89. That legendary heel turn angle from, was it the Chi-Town Rumble? Or was it the following show? It was the post-match angle after the Ricky Steamboat match where Funk gave Flair the pile driver on the announce table, and it set that feud into motion. I think a lot of people remember the I Quit match with him and Flair at the Clash of Champions later that year. And of course, you go further down the timeline, his ECW run in the 90s was pretty memorable. That was around the point that Terry started to adapt more of the hardcore persona. And, well, I think I'll just leave the conversation at that. If you've watched this channel for a while, you know my personal takes on ECW and the whole garbage hardcore wrestling thing. Not my flavor. But then, of course, you go to the WWF run in 97, his debut as Chainsaw Charlie in the lead-up to WrestleMania 14, that awesome feud and culminating match with him and Foley against the New Age Outlaws. And that's where a lot of Funk memories come into play for me. Those two standout moments with him and Flair, and then his run in the WWF during the late 90s. And when it comes to a guy like Terry Funk, a guy who started his career training in the 60s, worked his way up through the territories, moving around across the country and eventually internationally once you start factoring in the All Japan stuff. This is a guy that's been around the block more than once. And the thing with me, and it's always going to be frustrating to talk about when it comes to the hardcore style of things, on the one hand, you have to credit a guy like Terry Funk for being able to adapt his career as he got older. He had so much longevity in the business. What are we talking? A 40-plus year run? Not necessarily on a full-time basis, but the mileage he was able to get, especially with a lot of the stuff he was doing later in his career. I mean, I never really approved of the deathmatch or extreme role stuff he was doing during his ECW runs, or even the stuff he was doing in Japan, the exploding barbed wire matches. I'm still of the opinion that I think those matches have done a lot of damage to the wrestling business in more ways than one, more harm than good kind of thing. In a way, you can say that guys like Funk and Foley were role models for a lot of the generation we see breaking into the business today. Like the younger wrestlers that grew up idolizing that form of wrestling. And now it's just been taken to the extreme. And the other issue, and I know this will be a shocker to most people, but nobody in today's business is on a Mick Foley or a Terry Funk level. I mean, those two were unique to the form of hardcore wrestling because they still had other tools that presented them as legends of the business. You know, they're not the kind of deathmatch stunt dummies you see get in today's business where it's just fat, out-of-shape, lumberjack-looking morons that jump off through roofs through flaming tables. Now, Foley and Funk actually knew how to draw money. They knew how to work. And I think that's where the major disconnect comes in for a lot of younger fans today. They just don't understand that while, yes, Funk and Foley did that style of wrestling, but they still understood the business. And they were still personalities that drew money and sold tickets. Yes, Funk was an innovator of hardcore wrestling to a degree, and he did work with a lot of ECW originals, the Sabus, the Sandmans, the Foleys of the world. But you should at least be able to recognize and put two and two together, Terry Funk was not a typical backyard outlaw deathmatch guy. He may have influenced a lot of those modern deathmatch stunt showmen, but I refuse to refer to those people as professional wrestlers because they're not. They're stuntmen. They're outlaw deathmatch clowns. Not even in the same universe. And just because those people grew up idolizing guys like Terry Funk doesn't mean those people actually understand wrestling or the significance of Funk working that style for the later half of his career. You know, everything always comes with its pros and cons. Funk is absolutely an all-time great, though. You can't really dispute that. For the family legacy, the family lineage, his personal contributions to the business, Terry Funk was a truly unique, one-of-a-kind individual. A voice and persona that is often imitated and never duplicated, no matter how many people try. I just wish some of these numbskulls in AEW that try to replicate that hardcore bullshit actually understood its purpose. You know, the ones that try to be poor imitations of Terry and fail epically. Jon Moxley, just to name one. The ones that don't have great minds for the business and don't know shit from apple butter about what professional wrestling is supposed to be. They just think it's cool to slice open every artery in their body for no goddamn reason. Speaking of AEW and their ongoing problems, you want to talk about that show from Wednesday night? God, after last week, I didn't even know what to expect. Anything would have been moderately tame by comparison after last week's catastrophe. Boy, howdy, did they try to outdo themselves with this opener, though. Are we sure Russo isn't being hired as a consultant? Actually, I shouldn't even kid. Even Russo would have put his foot down on some of this nonsense. Now, Russo is the king of 500 things happening all at one time in a given segment. With these elite jagoffs, it's about 900 plus things happening in a given segment. And I mean, where do you even start with something so ridiculous? The match is supposed to be the Elite versus Juice Robinson and the Guns. And of course, after last week's show where every single fucking match on the card had some kind of run-in or afterbirth attached to it, a week later, these idiots couldn't even seize fire through Seg 1. Just to give us one clean match with one clean finish. Couldn't even do that. No. Instead, it's an immediate jumpstart in the aisleway with all 6 guys. There's no bell. Rick Knox is just standing there like a fucking tool, flailing his arms in the air like a guy having a seizure. They're all trading shit back and forth in the most choreographed way imaginable. To the point where it all looks so artificial and fake because it's just an ongoing cycle of guys hitting a move, rolling out to the floor, and then the next guy hits the ring to do his thing. At some point during this, Juice decked Rick Knox with a left hand and knocked him out. The highlight of which was hearing Taz mark out on commentary. So at least it's confirmed that I'm not the only one that can't stand that egg-headed dipshit. And after about 10 minutes of nonstop BS, finally Omega sends the heels packing. In all of this, mind you, designed to set up a 6-man tag for the Wembley show in less than 48 hours with Omega, Hangman Page, and Kota Ibushi versus Take a Shit, Jay White, and Juicy Fruit. So, of course, in this segment, Adam Page, total afterthought. Ibushi wasn't even there. Jay White wasn't even booked in the initial match to begin with. Could this shit be any more impossible to keep track of? And honestly, all that garbage, a complete waste of 8 minutes of TV time, just to do more fake-looking brawling. Because we already didn't get burnt out on all the angles and run-ins from last week. Let's just shove more of that down people's throats. Luckily, they at least followed it with something that didn't totally suck. The sit-down interview with Renee Paquette and MJF, ahead of the big showdown at Wembley this weekend. She's there to pick his brain a little bit and see where his head is at. And I should start out by pointing out the obvious. Isn't it amazing how much better MJF segments are when they're not totally manufactured comedy sketches? And you just let MJF be himself on camera? Being a condescending douchebag that throws in snide remarks, even though he's still pretending to be all chummy with the crowd. He's telling the UK fans that they need to cheer for this main event like it's the biggest attraction of all time. He's already confident the UK fans are going to be solely behind him. I believe he called himself the modern-day British Bulldog, if Bulldog were Jewish and was a moderately good promo. And if you ever heard Davey Boy cut a promo, God love him. That remark left you chuckling. And he put over the significance of All In, saying that without the former legends that helped pave the way for guys like him, this type of event would never have happened. At which point he goes to start naming a bunch of former WWF and WCW legends, never once mentioning guys like Jericho. Bet that's stuck in his craw. He talked about the friendship with Adam Cole. Said that the whole friendship thing is a new concept for him. He's never had a chance to really be vulnerable and let his guard down. And while there's been some cracks in the foundation with the way they've interacted on camera, they've always gone back on the same page. Because that's what brothers do. And he told the fans to take the journey with him because he promises that we'll be rewarded by the end. Which is a very odd line. But when it was over, I basically came to the conclusion that had they done away with all the WWE light comedy skits, I'd probably have a much better attitude about the whole MJF Adam Cole story than I do right now. But the problem is they've jerked me around so much by trying to implement all the hokey comedy, it's really hindered my ability to take any of their stuff seriously. They've crossed that threshold where it's become too shticky. A lot of this felt like MJF trying to backpedal and course correct for all the previous garbage we've been fed. And while I know MJF and Adam Cole, like, that whole dynamic has been a monumental ratings booster for the Wednesday program, not that the competition is all that high, what with everything else going on, it's like, yeah, the people like it, but it's still not the kind of wrestling I enjoy personally. There is a way to do the wacky tag partner dynamic in wrestling. We've seen it done before. But a lot of this has been gone about the wrong way. And yeah, I know everything's up in the air with all the stuff happening with Roddy and Taven and Bennett. Whatever's going on there. There are things that intrigue me about the story. Mostly in the sense that I want to see who ends up turning. But like I said, I just wish they could have done more segments like this. Instead of those god-awful fake-looking pre-tapes with all the overproduction and the flamboyance thrown in. But we'll see what happens on Sunday. They've got the opening prelim Ring of Honor World Tag Title match, and they also get the headline for the world title later on. So we'll see. In comparison to everything else being advertised, that will more than likely be the most interesting thing on the entire show. A lot of question marks surrounding how it's all going to turn out. So then we immediately dive back into the Raw sewage. Oddly enough, Moxley was in the next match, so that analogy is quite fitting. Yeah, he wrestled Phoenix. Depending on your definition of wrestle, they certainly did something in the ring for 10 plus minutes. I was sort of in and out of the room during it because it's a Jon Moxley match. I'm not going to sit through his garbage material. It's all the same shit anyway. Not like I'm missing anything revolutionary. I did catch the afterbirth, though. Because you knew there was going to be one. It's AEW. And when I say I caught the angle, I should say, I did my best to retain as much information as I could. There was only about 80 things flying by the screen in about 20 seconds. So it was only slightly annoying to keep up with everything. All I remember is Santana and Ortiz randomly made their returns here. They took out the babyface team. And then the camera decided to miss the most important shot of Phoenix getting laid out with a crowbar by the BCC in the middle of the ring. So, of course, while there's shit happening on the rampway with everybody brawling, they cut back to the ring, and all I see is Phoenix laying flat on his stomach dead. And the doctors are immediately coming down to attend to him. Of course, I had no idea what the fuck happened, because AEW's genius production truck didn't bother catching the fucking shot. So, they do the whole stretcher job. They do the somber mood setting where everybody's standing there in mourning over Phoenix's dead body. And then they came back from break and showed the actual angle with the camera filming the entire thing. Because somebody finally clued them in on the second go-around. And they loaded Phoenix off to a local medical facility. After which Kingston promised Renee Paquette that he would fix the issue at Wembley. Which I guess is coded language for rearranging Moxley's face. Okay, sidetrack for a minute here. Serious question. Are we just supposed to totally ignore the fact that Renee's husband is running around on the show like a crazed lunatic, beating the shit out of people and bludgeoning them with weapons every week? Meanwhile, she's just supposed to be the pretty face interviewer? Does she ever actually talk with her husband during the week? Does she ever call him up and ask, John, is there a particular reason that you like branding people with irons or slicing open their foreheads with forks every week? It's like we're totally supposed to forget the fact that these two are married. That they just never socialize off camera. Meanwhile, Mox is supposed to be one of their top heels. I think Renee's a babyface interviewer. I mean, she's certainly playing a neutral party. None of this shit makes sense. So then we go back to the ring for another WWE Light segment. This time sponsored by the genius booking mind of Chris Jericho. A revolutionary concept in the history of pro wrestling, never seen before. A contract signing. Mind-blowing. Something that's totally not been beaten to death in the other company for the better part of the last decade. And wouldn't you know it, conveniently placed on the table, along with the contract, are 2 functioning microphones. Because you had to figure they were going to cut promos on each other, right? So sure enough, they do some back and forth banter for a while. Ospreay's nearly impossible to understand because his British accent is so goddamn thick. But I believe his general message was that he's already a superior athlete to everybody in AEW, including the Elite and Jericho, which is equivalent to being the nicest guy in prison. And then Jericho did a monologue about how he predicted Ospreay was going to be in a wheelchair by the time he was 30 because of all the dangerous flips and stunts he was doing before he became a household name. Pfft. Yeah. Chris Jericho telling guys to tone down the flips. Yeah, that's paid off well in AEW, hasn't it? He explains that this Wembley show is the biggest event of Jericho's storied career. Bigger than any WrestleMania or Tokyo Dome show put together. Debatable. And of course, they wind up getting to the obligatory shoving match, then having to pretend like security's fully capable of holding them both back. And, well, 2 things here. Number 1, and I mentioned this last week, Will Ospreay is supposed to be the heel in this feud, correct? How is that supposed to work in Wembley? Call it a hunch. I failed to see a situation where the UK fans are going to actively boo Will Ospreay, even with Donnie Dipshit in his corner. I mean, Don Callis is only a heat magnet in the sense of the warped way the crowd's going along with it. But even they're just kind of playing along. The other thing, and I know this might just be nitpicking for the sake of nitpicking, but God forbid I ask it. Why are these guys feuding? Let's just go with the simple fundamental question in all of this. Seriously, I want to know, why this feud? Why this match? Beyond the insider explanation that it was supposed to happen in the Tokyo Dome 2 years ago, but the scamdemic ruined it. I want a legit story explanation for why this match is happening. When Ospreay returned last week and beat up Jericho, that was the only time we've ever seen those guys interact on camera in AEW. To my recollection, there was never any acknowledgement of Jericho and Ospreay's history prior to that. There was no video package. There was no highlight reel. There was no promo explaining any of their backstory. Literally, our entire explanation for this 2-week build is it should have happened a couple years ago. Okay, that sucks. And it only further validates the notion that it's giving Jericho another major pay-per-view payout because he needed to find some bullshit rationale to weasel his way onto the card. Even though most people are fed up with him and just want him to go away. No, of course, Jericho was going to find a way to get himself booked on this fucking card. Did you really think he wouldn't? God, this whole thing is so lame. At least when it comes to the stuff with Cole and MJF, remove the bad comedy skits, they have at least attempted to develop and establish a relationship with those two. Some kind of story that we can all get behind. We heard MJF earlier give his side of the story. Everything that's gone down between him and Cole, the good, the bad, the uncertain. And now here's Cole to explain his relationship with Max, what it means to him, talking about when he came back to AEW, he wasn't the most confident wrestler in the world. He needed a boost, somebody to remind Adam Cole of exactly who he is. And MJF was that guy. More interesting remarks that leave you scratching your head. Adam Cole saying that MJF reminded him of who he once was. What's that? The top heel of the former company's developmental brand? And I don't even mean that as a subtle dig for Cole being the developmental brand guy. Not at all. I just mean the simple fact that he was a heel for like his entire WWE run. Relatively unblemished. Yeah, he was like the main draw of NXT for a period of time, but if Adam Cole did have a babyface run in WWE at any point, I don't remember it. This is one of the first times I recollect seeing babyface Adam Cole in any capacity. Haven't been the biggest fan of it, but this is easily the best stuff he's been doing since he came back from the injury. And still, Cole's making sure to put over that he still wants to be the AEW World Champion because it is the top belt. And while Cole's held every major world title in every other major promotion, he's never held the AEW World title yet. So there's a career accomplishment end goal that he's still trying to meet. Meanwhile, you still got the Roddy Strong stuff going on in the background. And this was part of the interview that I actually liked. You know, once they started showing all the footage of Roddy, the stuff with Cole and Roddy in the parking lot, and Cole basically assuring that he's going along for the ride with MJF right now. That one shot where he's hugging Max in the middle of the ring, but he's sort of making a gesture with his fist. Kind of like he was stabbing the proverbial knife in his back. I like the shot where he was looking over at the world title when MJF was hugging him again. If you think about it, now that I kind of see all this in a package, there have been a lot of subtle nuances with the way Cole's been acting in this whole thing. And that's why I've been heavily leaning in the direction of thinking it's Cole that's going to be the one to turn. The interaction with him and Roddy has always seemed a little suspect. Kind of like they've been plotting something the whole time and they're just waiting to pick their spot. So when Cole watched all that footage back here, I mean, he got all defensive and basically left, letting everybody know point blank, there are no issues between him and MJF. All right. I mean, those are the words that came out of his mouth. Do you believe him? Again, it's not totally obvious what's going to happen here. But the one thing I thought about when it was over, you know, they do probably realize that Max watched all this footage back as well, right? The things that he may have not caught at first glance, but now with hindsight, maybe he's starting to think twice about all this. So maybe in a way, now that we're at this point, if MJF did in fact see that footage back, he would have a perfectly justifiable reason to fuck Cole. Even if it's just MJF that turns, at least he's vindicated. He can argue, yeah, well, this guy was going to try and fuck me anyway, so I just played 4D chess and stayed ahead of the punch. So again, we'll see. It was very interesting, the way they kind of pulled or pieced all this together. I mean, you think about it for a minute. I know it's kind of a weird thing in professional wrestling where you shoot angles on the show and you kind of just assume that the wrestlers aren't watching on the monitor anywhere in the building. It is entirely possible that MJF did not catch any of this, but if he's watching the show, if he's seeing things that are happening behind the scenes, he kind of has a different perspective on all this now. Like the camera shots where he's going in to hug Adam Cole, but he sees all the motions and all the things that Cole's doing behind his back. Yeah, that kind of changes your perspective of everything. If you're MJF and you're a smart guy. So, it's not totally apparent what's going to happen. And I like that. From there, we went to this Darby Allin, Nick Wayne versus Swerve Strickland AR Fox match, which I did not like. At first, what I thought was the scheduled match for the Wembley show, because they kept on referencing this coffin match with Darby going up against the Mogul crew. But on second thought, isn't that match supposed to be Swerve and Fox versus Darby and Sting? At least that was the initial game plan. So they literally just took one babyface out, replaced him with another one, and did almost the exact same match we're being advertised for the Wembley show. And, well, I should note, this was the first match I watched all program. The opening six-man was just a big schmoz with no actual bell. The Moxley-Phoenix match, I skipped out on because ain't nobody got time for Mox's bullshit. And then we had a bunch of promos and pre-tapes until the top of the hour where we finally got this match. And of course, right from the jump, it immediately breaks down with everybody fighting on the floor. Big moves and dives galore. Everybody going 100 miles an hour for no reason. All the things that Jericho allegedly raked Will Ospreay over the coals for just 2 segments prior. Meanwhile, you got AR Fox doing a totally worthless backwards 360 plancha to the outside, wherein they immediately put the camera on an older gentleman for a reaction shot. If he had a reaction, I certainly couldn't figure out what it was, other than sheer boredom. There was a poorly mistimed spot on the apron where everybody got lost and couldn't figure out where they were supposed to be. It ended with Nick and Darby doing stereo dives off the ring post to the floor, all to set up a commercial break spot. And they come back with everybody fighting in the crowd for no reason. Aubrey, as usual, just standing around pretending to bark orders. Come on, guys, let's get it back in the ring, guys. Because seriously, what the fuck is she going to do? All 115 pounds of her. More four-way spots and random pandemonium. They end up killing Darby with a double foot chair stomp onto the floor, leaving Nick to fend for himself for the last few minutes. And of course, he's already kicking out of finishers and no-selling everything in the book. So he's hopeless, because he's never going to learn how to work with experienced ring veterans and know what they're doing. And of course, the finish is Nick rolling up AR Fox after a missed 450 splash. The flattest finish you could possibly do. All that shit they did previously. Roll up, 1, 2, 3, out of nowhere, no build up. Garbage. But of course, we had to stick around. Because you know what it was time for, right? That's right. The afterbirth. And what an afterbirth it was. If y'all thought I asked too many questions, always being confused as to what the fuck is going on with this program, may I present whatever in the hell this all was. So after the match, Swerve gets on the mic, and he starts roasting AR Fox, just ripping him a new one, calling him a piece of shit, saying he can't trust him at Wembley because he can't even beat an 18-year-old kid. So while Swerve's running him up the flagpole, who should come out but Brian Cage? And he hits the ring, he lays Fox out with a Steiner screwdriver, at which point the heels are now standing over Fox, leaving things a little open-ended as to what's going to be happening in the coffin match now. Is it going to be Cage and Swerve versus Darby and Sting? Why the random change in personnel for the heel team? Well, you just wait, because it became even more overly convoluted with what followed. Because here comes Sting, Darby, and Nick. They're giving chase to the heels as they back up the aisleway. Meanwhile, in the ring, keep in mind, this all happened about a minute, maybe 90 seconds after Brian Cage just killed this fucking AR Fox dude with a screwdriver. All of a sudden, Darby Allin begins to cut a promo telling Fox that he respects him, he grew up with him, they've always used each other as a shoulder to cry on. Meanwhile, I'm like, is this guy just going to no-sell this fucking move all of a sudden? Sure enough, dumb motherfucker gets right back up to his feet and goes in to hug Darby. The amount of grown adult men I see hug and kiss each other on this show is beyond putrid. Bunch of pussy-ass school kids. So, oh yeah. I guess AR Fox is a babyface again. All of a sudden. For no reason. Didn't he just turn heel like 2 weeks ago? Now he and Darby are on the same page again, just like that? Now he's just randomly back to being a babyface? Just, yeah, totally discount all that other previous shit. And just when you think things couldn't get any more convoluted or contrived, who should then come out but Christian Cage and the Dinosaur? And then you got Christian on the mic burying Nick Wayne and his dead father for Christ knows what reason. Where the hell did that come from? And, well, I don't think he ever confirmed nor denied being Swerve's partner at Wembley, but was he? The fuck was going on here? Did anybody else understand what was happening? For the life of me, I couldn't explain it. Does AR Fox not have a passport? So they had to change plans last minute, realizing that Fox probably wouldn't be able to fly overseas? Did Tony Khan just decide we needed to have another pointless Swerve on this show that made no sense? Why is this happening? I have so many questions, yet such little care or interest in the actual coffin match. That's the amazing thing. I don't even care about this fucking match, and I was still pissed off by the end of it. You know, it's probably in our best interest to just move on, because my brain just about melted after I witnessed this. The ADHD was too much for me to handle. It was not a particularly good lead-in or setup for the Beta Bucks FTR sit-down that followed, but, well, I at least tried. One of the few times I actually sat through an entire Bucks interview and did not reach for the remote directly. And look, obviously they're trying to hype the rubber match. There was going to be an element of working here between both teams. I was actually curious to see how deep they would go and to try to make things personal or mention anything insider to get under each other's skin. And I think by the end, that's why I was kind of left disappointed. Beyond the fact that it wasn't a particularly good promo from either sides, the whole setup seems to be about bragging rights. To establish who the better team is. To establish a legacy. And like, okay, that's nice and all, but that's it? After all the shit that's gone down in the last year? What about the division that's been caused in the company? The two different camps these guys compete for. The fact that for the last year, CM Punk has been the sole talking point with all the elite drama. And that FTR are firmly on Punk's side. You're just going to continue to ignore all of that? And make it about hardware? Make it about legacy? Who gives a fuck? No one is interested in this match to see the Bucks or FTR create a legacy. It's about them settling a personal beef because the Elite hate CM Punk and vice versa, and FTR are good friends with Punk, and the Bucks hate that. We know these guys don't like each other. We know there's a personal vendetta. There's a professional beef, sure, but it's also a personal one. And yeah, they talked about this being personal in the interview, but did they really shift it up to another gear? All the times AEW airs out dirty laundry on camera, or they try to stretch the barriers of kayfabe to try and bring some reality to these segments. And of course, this is the feud they're trying not to overstep their boundaries. Why? Why would you not go there? We all know what's going on. We know these guys don't like each other. Why not just embrace that? Air it out. Let them discuss all. We're 2 days away from the fucking show. You might as well just go there. No, instead we got this lame segment. And it really didn't further boost my interest in seeing the match. I was already kind of iffy on it to begin with. This didn't help matters any. The Bucks always sound fake and disingenuous. FTR have kind of been hit and miss with their promo work, depending on who they're feuding with or what they're talking about. Even they didn't seem to be all that enthused by having to go through with this exchange. So I think we can already assume who's going over at the pay-per-view. Is it too early to be predicting boo-boo job face? I think Dax and Cash gave us an early indicator here. Anyway, here's where I skipped through a bunch of stuff to try to get to the main event a lot quicker. The girls' segment shaved off at least 10 to 15 minutes altogether. There was also an Acclaimed segment where they stormed out to the ring to call out the House of Drek. Because, you know, we apparently already didn't see enough fights on the show already. We already had 16 of them in the course of the last hour and a half. We needed a 17th. So, like two bumbling morons, the babyfaces call out the heels for a 3-on-2 fight. The heels answer. They come down to the ring. They proceed to beat the shit out of the babyfaces until finally, who should make his big return but Billy Gunn. Not here to stab his boys in the back, though. but to cut the best promo on the entire show by signifying that he had to do a couple really difficult things recently. The first of which was standing by and watching the House of Black beat up Caster and Bowens while Billy was watching at home. And the second was when he took off his boots and left them in the middle of the ring and they destroyed them. So now Billy has to do something about it. And it's one last ride for him. Because when he strolls into All In, it's not going to be daddy ass. It's going to be badass. And, well, like I said, it was the best promo on the entire show, bar none. Leave it to the 30-plus year ring veteran to make that happen. I don't know how I feel about the House of Drek versus the Acclaimed. Round whatever this is. How many matches have these guys had? 72? They've never been any good. But they're just going to go back to the well with it yet again. I mean, I guess I have to credit them for not going with the predictable heel swerve. I was totally under the impression that that was the direction they were going. I guess it's possible they still try to pull something at the pay-per-view. Maybe Bowens and Caster are the ones to turn. It would not be totally out of the realm of possibilities. But we'll see. I mean, I was never really all that enthused with this program to begin with, but I may actually watch that match out of sheer curiosity, just to see what they do for a finish. Again, the match itself, I don't know about all that. FTR and Punk got a salvageable match out of the HOB. I don't know if the Acclaimed are capable of doing that themselves, with or without Billy Gunn. Tell you what, though, when it comes to that main event, no one on God's green earth was going to get a salvageable match out of the Hardy Boys. That I know for sure. For absolutely no reason that I could think of, their TV main event this week was Matt and Jeff Hardy versus Aussie Open. Yeah, I can only imagine how the ratings did in that segment. Two random underneath guys that nobody's ever heard of versus a decrepit, aging, broken down tag team that can't wrestle for shit anymore and everybody knows it. As expected, it was horrible. Pretty much just turned into a glorified tornado match by the end. I mean, a good chunk of it happened during the commercial break anyway, so I mean, we missed like half the match to begin with. And then the Aussie guys just randomly hit Jeff with their finish and won. Clean. Literally from out of nowhere. Now the Hardy Boys are jobbing to underneath no-names in 8-minute TV main events. Could you stoop any lower? But that was mostly all just a setup so they could get MJF and Adam Cole involved at the end. I wish the angle itself would have actually come at the expense of two guys with some actual name value. I still don't know which one's Aussie and which one's Open. They're just two generic-looking indie dudes who happen to have one of 80 sets of tag belts. Yet they still tower over Cole and MJF, which is comedic. But, yeah, they basically did the brawl angle here to close things out. But they also teased some miscommunication spots where Cole accidentally almost kicked MJF in the face, but MJF caught the boot and sort of death glared him, which was oddly humorous. And he fished around in his pocket for the diamond ring, teased putting it on, but then he put it away and then went to hugging Cole to end the show. Again, they're being very wishy-washy with both guys, which is not a bad thing. Again, I talked about it earlier. I like how this is one of those stories that it could go either way, and it would make sense, no matter what they do. This is the only thing on that show worth giving a damn about. Everything else is either a multi-man clusterfuck or something I really don't have a vested interest in watching. I hate to say it. Even Bucks FTR 3. A year ago? Absolutely. I would have been all in to see that program. At this point, I'm kind of over it. Neither team has any steam. There's no real tension or blood feud boiling now. They waited too long. It's just not the same. I guess Joe and Punk has some appeal to it on paper. It's not a total one-match show. But it's like every other AEW pay-per-view I witness. The pros are few and far between for me. They got a lot of stuff announced. On the surface, it looks like a stacked card. Maybe for the marks it is. But for me, I mean, I checked the wiki page earlier today, but there's not a whole lot that's grabbing my attention right now. I hate the multi-man matches. It always comes off like a lame excuse for them to just shoehorn a bunch of people on the card. And like I said, they got 2 dark matches, pre-show matches, I guess. And what do they have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I mean, they got 9 matches for a full card. And again, they have a lot of names, but what's the backstory behind any of the matches? Like the Golden Elite versus the Bullet Club Gold? That match really came out of nowhere and didn't have much build behind it. The Stadium Stampede, I'm not even going to watch that garbage. Look at all the names involved. The hell would you want to watch that for? I don't know. I just don't know. The 4-way with the girls, like, come on. You really think I'm going to watch that? Even the coffin match. Oh, this has been updated recently. Okay, so it's Darby and Sting versus Swerve and Christian. All right, whatever. I'm not even going to ask. I'm going to leave it at that. That whole angle they shot here on the Go Home show made no sense. Sounds like something came up last minute that prevented Fox from being able to make the show, so if they had to pull him last minute because Tony Khan's an idiot and didn't realize he didn't have a passport, then that's on him. Unless something else is going on that we don't know about. But when it comes to the All In show, this is going to be the main talking point when we look back years later. A what could have been type of card situation versus what we actually got. It's pretty well documented. This entire show hinges on the fact that it's the first ever AEW show in Wembley. The tickets sold were purely based on brand and company intrigue, nothing else. Those people would have bought a ticket if they advertised the main event as Tony Khan taking a shit in the middle of the ring. They wouldn't care. And while I'm sure it's going to be a spectacle, the visual of seeing 80,000 fans in a packed building, the kind of atmosphere surrounding everything, I mean, that all will make up for the lack of card depth or build. But that's all been lousy. Aside from the couple things we've known about well in advance, that show they did last week where they basically had nonstop 2 hours of running angles and beatdowns, that was their last-minute attempt to try to actually put a card together. And the jury's still out as to whether or not that'll end up being enough to sell All In as the annual event. Because we still don't even know about that. Is Wembley going to be a one-time thing for AEW? Are they going to try to actually run this show every year? We don't know. I would have to think it won't be. But it's about developing a platform. Because here's the thing. Once you establish it every year, a Wembley show is going to be centered around the amount of people buying a ticket. How long is it before that starts to wane? Because what's the incentive? Okay, you're buying a ticket to see the show live. That might have some staying power for a year or two. But is that a long-term sustainable business model? Yes, of course, you want to support the company, and that's one thing. But it's what I've continually referred back to when discussing the Wembley show. And we don't have to have that conversation now necessarily, but in a few years, maybe it'll be worth examining again. Once the ticket sales start to wane, once the UK fan base kind of gets a grasp on what the Wembley show is, like I said, that honeymoon period may exist for a couple years. But if AEW wants to try to make this an annual thing, they're going to run into some problems in the next 5 years or so. You can't just sell a pay-per-view because, hey, we're AEW. That might work in the short term. Not in the long term. Oh. These shows are definitely going off the rails a lot quicker than I remember. Funny how historical perspective can change your memory of things. We all think, yeah, man, once Crockett sold to Turner in '88, that was it. The evident downfall of the company. Little do we remember just how bleak things were in the late summer of '87, going into the fall. This show for the last month and a half, it's been a chaotic mess. Just a total mess. There's 90 different things happening at a given time. Everybody's mad at like 20 other dudes for reasons that are usually thrown together with very little explanation. There's no real prioritization of who's at the top of the card versus the bottom of the card. Everybody's just on the show doing random shit. And the whole layered feuds thing is not a new concept with Crockett TV. I mean, guys have been doing multiple programs at a given time for a long time now. But especially with all the UWF guys showing up in the last 3 or 4 weeks, that's where I've really started to notice there's no structure with any of this stuff right now. It's a constant battle of, let's see how many dudes we can shoehorn onto the program. And somewhere amidst all that chaos, we've got the Ric Flair-Ron Garvin feud, which is really the only thing that's carrying this show at the moment. Even the cold open was a big what the fuck moment. Okay, it's Dusty Rhodes versus one of the gladiators from an NWA Pro taping. At first, I thought it was setting up an angle to where we'd find out that the gladiator was secretly one of the horsemen in disguise. Instead, it was Dusty choking out said gladiator with his Weaver lock, the sleeper submission that he was trying to establish. And then after Dusty chokes him out, Johnny Weaver hits the ring to tell Dusty that he needs to wake him up. Because that's part of the sportsmanlike conduct when you knock a guy out with a submission hold. You're supposed to slap him on the back of the neck to get him to come to. So, Dusty goes over, he sits the gladiator up, and then for literally no reason, other than the fact that Dusty just decided to be a dick, he smacked the guy right across the back of the head as hard as humanly possible. I just thought, what an asshole. And of course, we go back to the booth with Tony and David. They're all smiles. They're watching that footage back and laughing at Dusty being an unprofessional dick. David's making a mockery of the whole thing, looking at Tony like, huh? You know, Tony, wouldn't it be funny if Dusty choked out Lex Luger with that hold and didn't wake him up? How great would that be? Just leave the guy for dead. That'd be so fun. What the fuck am I watching? Who are the good guys and the bad guys here? Baffling television. So after that moderately strange start to the show, the reverse psychology of the babyface announcers laughing at the idea of the babyface wrestlers trying to intentionally kill other talents. So while I had that thought simmering, we go to the ring for Mike Rotunda versus Alan Martin. They were talking about the ongoing story with him and Dory Funk Jr. regarding the Florida Heavyweight title. Apparently Dory had stolen the belt from Rotunda, even though he was not the champion. One of my biggest pet peeves in wrestling. The storyline of the non-champion stealing the belt away from the actual title holder, yet management does nothing about it. They just let the guy walk around with stolen property without slapping him with fines or suspensions. And meanwhile, the champ has to fight to get his belt back instead of, getting management involved. Saying, hey, tell that fucker to give me my belt back. Anyway, they had a boring TV opener. The entire match consisted of headlocks, resting arm bars, and then finally Rotunda picked up Martin for an airplane spin and won. And then Rotunda went over to the booth to basically reaffirm everything I just talked about a second ago. The fact that Dory and Terry Funk jumped Rotunda on TV. They stole his belt. They're not listening to NWA management. They refused to give the belt back to Mike. To which I simply wrote down in my notes, in big font, then fucking find them. Is it really that hard? But Mike is thinking positively about the situation. So he vows that he's going to get his belt back. The power of positivity. Mike Rotunda, a very hopeful man. Yeah, I think I've mentioned before, definitely a bigger fan of the Varsity Club version of Mike Rotunda. So then we had Jimmy Valiant versus El Negro. I believe one of the first times I've actually seen Handsome Jimmy come out with a braided beard. That's my end goal in life. To grow a thick enough beard to where I can braid it into a ponytail like Valiant did here. Anyway, it was every Handsome Jimmy squash since 1985. He won with the running elbow drop. Absolutely foul. But it's Jimmy Valiant, so the people loved it. And then we cut back to the booth for Dory Funk Jr. so he can provide us on an update with the comments that Mike Rotunda made. He states that he is in fact the Florida Heavyweight Champion now, and he can prove it because he has the belt in his possession. And he pulls out the belt. He shows it to the camera. And he goes, "See? It's mine. I own it." Well, I guess that settles it. Can't argue with that logic. That is indeed the Florida Heavyweight title belt. Dory Funk has possession of it. Therefore, I guess he's the rightful champion. Then he called out a bunch of guys from the Florida region, said he has his sights on them. We can simply chalk that conversation up to the ongoing theme with most of these Crockett shows. Everybody is feuding with 47 different people, and I have no idea who's mad at who or why. The only other thing I wrote down, Dory Funk referring to Blackjack Mulligan as a, quote, gas bag. That will never not be hilarious. You know what wasn't hilarious? Was Lasertron and Kendall Windham versus Dexter Westcott and Dale Lapras. Legitimately the worst match of all time. First thing I wrote down before they even rang the bell, Lasertron has a belt around his waist. Now at first I was not putting too much thought into it. But then as I started to recall some of Lasertron's previous TV matches, it hit me. Didn't this guy win the junior heavyweight title from Denny Brown in a totally random-ass TV match? And in fact, that was the belt he had. Lasertron, still the NWA Junior Heavyweight Champion. And all this time I've been making fun of the company mascot for having an AEW belt. Kendall and Hector completely fucked up a double back elbow spot. How, I don't even know. But they managed. There was a point where Kendall was just kind of sprawled across one of the job guys. Not even going for a pin attempt. He was laying on top of him with his crotch in his face. Almost as if he was going for an inverted teabag. Again, I can't explain. And, well, things got really screwy here with the video feed. And I actually played around with this for a minute just to make sure the problem wasn't coming from my end. I mean, it's entirely possible it was. I mean, Peacock is known to glitch out a time or two. But there was about a 45 second string here where the match had skipped ahead. The audio completely dropped out. There was a lot of static going on. Things got really out of sync. And then it went to one of those 30-second infomercials. Then everything came back and played perfectly fine. Was that a tape issue on their end? Was it something screwy going on with the network? I have no idea. Not to say it hurt my enjoyment of the match. Might have actually shaved off a minute or two of action, which is probably a good thing. By far my favorite spot here. Kendall and Dexter are doing what I can merely describe as sloppy mat grappling. They're rolling over each other. It's the worst amateur wrestling you've ever seen. And David Crockett, deadpan, after having been silent for the last 3 minutes, juts in with the following. Great wrestling. I burst out laughing. I mean, if you've been watching these shows long enough, you know when David Crockett mentally checks out. You can just hear it with the way he calls the action. Totally bored out of his mind. And, I don't even remember what happened here at the end. I had long since stopped paying attention. But I think Kendall went over with the Bulldog. Beyond hideous television. And then we came back for more stellar tag team action. This time it's the UWF Tag Team Champions of Tim Horner and Brad Armstrong versus Cougar Jay and Tommy Angel. Better known to some as the Lightning Express. Quite original, I know. Well, everyone's calling their team name So-and-So Express, so we'll steal that gimmick. Now we need a noun. Hey, Tim, they still call you White Lightning, right? How about we go with the Lightning Express? Because, you know, we're fast and quick and super flashy. So they're having this match. It's okay. Brad's a good worker, but his entire offense is mostly arm drags and drop kicks. Tim Horner's also a fine worker, but he's got the personality of rotting tree bark. They're both wearing matching booger green ring trunks. An odd choice of color schemes. And they did a million arm drag takeovers, a couple double team elbows. I did like the double assisted punch they gave to Cougar Jay in the gut, wherein Jay proceeded to fall forward onto his face and then roll over onto his back. Almost as if he was attempting a flip bump, but then he couldn't figure out how to rotate, so he just fell forward and then smashed his face on the mat. I laughed. And finally, Brad and Tim won with a double-assisted leg drop, to which David concluded by saying, quote, "Now you know why they're the UWF Tag Team Champions." No, please, David, elaborate. I would love to know what the reason is. Because they won a tag match on TV with two shitty job guys? Because they had matching ring gear? Why are they the UWF Tag Team Champions? Beats the hell out of me. Certainly could have been for their promo work. They were out to do a promo here. Words were definitely spoken. Brad did every white meat generic babyface promo in the world, thanking all the people that supported them along the way. And then Tim proceeded to rattle off a bunch of former UWF names, talking about ongoing TV feuds that we've never seen aired or explained on Crockett TV, expecting the people at home to know what the fuck they were talking about or why any of it mattered. So in other words, it's like I was watching AEW. Something about Skandar Akbar trying to buy Horner and Armstrong out of their contracts. Something about sending Big Bubba and Black Bart to steal their belts away from them. I can confirm, I had no idea what the hell they were talking about. It is entirely possible that was an ongoing feud. But again, when have we ever seen that footage aired? Never? Why the fuck was he talking about Eddie Gilbert? Again, none of this UWF footage was being aired on the syndicated TV shows. So unless you were watching the product, you probably had no idea what the hell these guys were talking about. And we've seen Gilbert make an appearance on this show. I don't ever recall him mentioning anything about the Lightning Express or the UWF tag belts. But apparently that's a thing now. Speaking of more UWF guys showing up from out of the woodwork, here comes Terry Taylor for a match. Last time we saw him in Crockett Promotions, we're going back to what? Late 85? It's been a couple years. He was a mainstay in Mid-South for the last several years, coming in and out of the territory. Around this point, gearing up for that stellar WWF run where he was about to become the Red Rooster. So it was nothing but sunshines, rainbows, and lollipops for Terry's future. He wrestled the Italian Stallion. And this was so awesome. Off the top of my head, I cannot remember what Terry was doing in the UWF around this point in 87. Judging from the way he was working here, I have to presume he was a heel. But here's the hilarious part. The last time Terry Taylor was on Crockett TV, he was a beloved babyface. Wasn't he working with Buddy Landell toward the tail end of 85? I mean, he was involved in a lot of main event angles, helping out guys like Dusty and Magnum and, whoever the top babyfaces were at the time. So the people knew who he was. They remember when he was a babyface. So even though Taylor's out there doing his damnedest to try and get these people to hate him, they're not buying it. He's doing every heel trope in the book, pulling the tights, grabbing the hair, trash talking, eye gouging, illegal chokeholds, everything he could possibly do to get these people to hate him. He may as well have just had a t-shirt that said, "Fuck you, boo me." And meanwhile, the fans were passionately chanting, "Go, Terry, go!" Or, "Beat him up, Terry, beat him up." He could have run down everybody's mother in the parking lot. The people still would have cheered him. I think some people were catching on to it toward the end because there were like 2 or 3 people that tried to start a light stallion chant. But those were quickly overshadowed. And then in the best finish of all time, just to reassure everybody that Terry Taylor is trying with every fiber of his being to be a bad guy, yet still failing. Terry rolls up Stallion and pulls on the tights to get the 3. Everybody blew a gasket. Babies thrown in the air. Loud, deafening cheers. Yay! This man cheated to win! Awesome! Just train wreck television. And then we come back for a sort of heel promo from Terry, wherein one of his first lines was, "Everybody in the world of wrestling is talking about Chris Adams." To which I paused, and I noted, "Excuse me? Chris Adams? People are talking about him around the globe? Does the entire globe consist of nothing but Texas? Because in that case, I would totally buy it." He also mentioned something about him and Eddie Gilbert going up against the Lightning Express. More UWF references. But at least we confirmed who Eddie Gilbert's partner was. Because Brad and Tim were out there talking about Eddie Gilbert going after the tag belts earlier. I don't think they ever mentioned who the partner was going to be. Glad to know Terry confirmed it was him. And then he told Tony he had to bounce. And Tony just looked at the camera and said, "All right then." I kind of like heel Terry Taylor. I've seen so much of his babyface stuff, especially his earlier run in Mid-South. I almost forgot there were points in Terry's career where he was a top heel. I need to go stock up on my late UWF footage. Try to relive some of his heel work during that time. Because, this was money. Absolute money. So then we go back to the ring for Ivan Koloff and the Raging Bull versus George South and Rocky King. Did we not just review this exact match the other week? Remember, I went off on the fact that I totally forgot Bull was still around? That I thought he already left the company by this point? Well, anyway, this is awesome. They're out there doing this match. It's all Bull and Ivan for like 99% of it. And then right at the last second, Rocky and George get a momentary hope spot where they trap Bull in their corner, and they're just throwing rights and lefts, trying every possible way to isolate this guy. And then Bull just says, "Nope, that's it. We're taking it home, brother." And he no-sells everything. He grabs George by the neck. He pulls him across the ring to his corner so he can tag Ivan. And then they just hit their double-assisted sickle from the middle rope and pin him. Veteran move. When the job guys start fighting back and going into business for themselves, take it home. So from there, we go over to the booth for what may have been the single worst and greatest Kevin Sullivan promo of all time. In the same segment. And, well, let me just start from the premise that I don't have anything against Kevin Sullivan. His promos have never been one to set the world ablaze. But he does have that vocal intonation to where whenever you hear Kevin Sullivan speak, you know it's his voice. So, he explains that he's here in Crockett Promotions for 2 reasons. At which point, he then gets completely sidetracked and never explains what his actual 2 reasons were for coming to WCW. One of them, I think, was him wanting to team up with Dusty Rhodes so they can finish their issues with the sheep herders. Yet again, More references to shit that nobody knew about at the time unless you were watching Florida wrestling. And I did like how the setup for that comment was, Dusty Rhodes, everybody knows about our storied past. We've been enemies from day one. So let's team together. Because that makes sense. So it's a very rocky start. He's out there bumbling over himself, losing his train of thought, just all over the place. And then he started running down the Horsemen. And he totally flipped the switch. He's just blistering these effing guys. It's so great. Calling them the 4 cows. Saying he knows debt collectors that are more physically imposing than Arn Anderson. He said Lex Luger's such a coward. Sullivan ran him out of the state of Florida so he could come up to work with the softer guys up north. Called out Tully Blanchard for having 2 of his personal valets walk out on him in the span of a year. Which a thought did hit me while I heard that point. I had totally forgotten about Dark Journey. She just totally vanished from the program, and I never put 2 and 2 together until Sullivan brought it up. I was like, oh yeah, she hasn't been around. I guess she's gone. And then he makes fun of Ric Flair for calling himself the 60-minute man when he's yet to go face-to-face with Sullivan for more than 60 seconds. He's going to change him to the 60-second man because that's how long Flair's going to last in the ring with him. And, yeah, it really was the best and worst of both worlds. It was every bad Kevin Sullivan promo and good Kevin Sullivan promo wrapped up into one segment. And then we come back to the ring for Gentleman Chris Adams versus Colt Steele. First time talking about Chris Adams outside the Dallas region. Still looks exactly like he did in World Class several years prior. Same ring gear, too. The plain white ring trunks and boots. We had massive superkick chants. So even the NWA crowd was privy to his earlier work. I don't even think they were calling it the superkick in Dallas for the longest time. I remember Bill Mercer was just calling it a thrust kick for the first year or two. But these people really wanted that superkick. I wish I felt the same. But, unfortunately, modern wrestling has totally killed the superkick spot for me. Or more accurately, I should say, the Bucks killed the superkick spot for me. And the superkick wasn't even the most impressive part of the match. The pile driver that Chris Adams gave this Colt fella right before the break. Boy howdy. It was kind of scary there for a minute. He hoisted the guy up in the air. And he's trying to balance his feet while he has the guy up. And you can even see he starts to stumble around a little bit. And I was like, oh God. This guy's about to get dropped right on top of his head and killed. But no. Adams stood his ground. He held him up. He regained his footing. And he gave him a nice seated pile driver. For a commercial break spot. Good. So even Crockett TV was using the pile driver as a break spot in the mid-'80s. And they come back. They do a few more spots. And then Adams gives Steele the super kick from out of nowhere and gets the 3. At which point, our first post-match angle on Crockett TV in about 7 weeks, Terry Taylor then hits the ring from behind, and he jumps Chris Adams. And right as Taylor's about to try and give Adams the backdrop, Adams does that really impressive backflip he always does, lands right on his feet, and then he turns around and cold cocks Taylor in the face and sends him running. A rare afterbirth that actually had some value. Because unlike what we see on AEW, where we get 18 running angles on one show, this was one of the first running angles we've seen after a match. I don't know, probably in at least a month, right? We don't see too many of them on the syndicated shows. So when they do happen, it actually means something. Go figure. And, as far as Chris's promo afterwards, talking about the press conference incident where Taylor decided to show up and pick a fight, asking Tony, "You probably saw the press conference, right? I'm sure all the people at home saw the press conference." To which I said, "No, Chris. As a matter of fact, I did not see the press conference now that you mention it." But at least he filled us in with the details. He said that Taylor jumped Adams from behind with a chair, and now Adams wants his revenge. He doesn't care what venue or what city it happens in. He's going to take the fight to Terry Taylor and settle the beef. And while he's doing the promo, I did notice that the room got a lot louder. The people just came unglued while Adams was ripping into Terry here. And I'm thinking to myself, man, these people really care about this Chris Adams-Terry Taylor feud. And then we cut back to the ring for Ron Garvin versus Keith Steinborn. And that's when I said, oh, well, that makes sense. Ron Garvin showed up. That's why the people are losing their shit. And not to give you the Cliff's Notes rundown here, but David Crockett pretty much gave everybody the spoiler of what exactly was going to happen. Ron Garvin was going to stretch the guy on the mat in sugar holds. He was going to play with him for a little bit. He was going to beat on him until he turned purple. And then he was going to win with his knockout punch. You'll never guess what happened. Ronnie did all of those things to Keith Steinborn in almost the exact order that David mentioned. And it was great. And then he went over to the booth to reaffirm all of his previous comments he's directed toward Flair in the last month or two. He says that he's been unstoppable. He's got one goal in mind, and that's to become the world's heavyweight champion. He says that when he shows up in those buildings, he wants all of his supporters to stand up and show Flair who's really running the ship. Rick is currently sitting in Garvin's seat, and Garvin's not going to take that shit. And he's not just going to win for the fans. He's doing this for himself to prove that the last 2 years of him chasing the title hasn't all been for naught. He talks about how neither guy's been giving an inch the entire time, but now it's just a matter of who wants it more. And, well, I kind of butchered that description, but I've been talking about this for the last several weeks, watching and recapping these Ron Garvin promos. It's some of the best career work he's ever done. He's firing on all cylinders with these babyface promos to the point, and I've talked about this as well, he's actually kind of outclassed Flair in terms of delivery. It's just such a damn shame that title reign never came off like they intended. They had so much momentum behind Ron Garvin here. I don't know what the hell happened. But that window of him carrying the belt for 2 or 3 months in the fall, no. We'll talk about it. It's probably another textbook example in wrestling of the thrill of the chase being more over than the actual fulfillment. So then Kevin Sullivan wrestled Larry Stevens. And, well, here's all I wrote down. I could probably expand if I wanted to, but I think this will be better than any possible breakdown I could give it. Kevin slapped and chopped the shit out of Stevens forever. Then he gave Stevens a tilt-a-whirl slam. Stevens tried to bridge a shoulder up. And then Kevin got mad, punched him in the face about 6 times in a row. And then he pinned him. Whether or not Sullivan went into business for himself at that very moment, I don't care. That finish was amazing. Hit a guy with a billion slaps, give him one offensive move, hit him with several more slaps, and then pin him. Why doesn't anybody think about that shit in today's business? Why does everybody have to hit their fucking finish? Just smack a guy in the face a million times and pin him. It's more believable than most of the finishers we see these days. So yeah, that probably went about a minute. And then we immediately segue into the next match after the break. It's Bugsy McGraw versus Terry Jones. And I wrote down significantly less about this match than I did the previous match. This one went substantially a shorter amount of time. Bugsy hit the ropes like a deranged lunatic. He shook his hips around. He began swimming around in a circle. Then he went for the initial lockup. He did the hokey pokey turnaround. He gave Terry the worst left hand of all time. And then he followed it with a back elbow and a body splash for the 3. Dreadful. Almost as dreadful as the follow-up interview. But because of the individuals involved, I can't outright bury it. Because it was pretty fucking amazing. First, Bugsy comes barreling over toward the interview podium. He, said something to the extent about him being crazy and odd. Definitely not going to debate that. And while he's doing his wacky promo, here comes Handsome Jimmy to interrupt and proceed to make the segment even wackier. He and Bugsy have a bro hug, followed by some very awkward shucking and jiving. At which point, Jimmy takes over the promo, and Bugsy begins finagling with the format paperwork. The expression on Tony's face the entire time this is happening, befuddlement. That's probably the most apropos term. He was mesmerized by what he was witnessing. I believe Jimmy's exact line was, quote, "I was at the train station when I found Bugsy, but the problem was he was actually waiting for a bus." And while he's talking about them going to school at the same time, only Bugsy went to Penn State and Jimmy went to the state pen. Get it? Finally, Jimmy said that he and Bugsy are going to make headway in all the local cities. And they did some more dancing. And then they left. You know, sometimes I watch these interview segments. Words cannot properly define the stuff that's happening in front of my eyes. Bugsy McGraw and Jimmy Valiant on camera together in the same segment, being goofy. There are no words. I can't explain it. It's horrible. It's over the top. I have no idea what the fuck they're talking about. But the people love it. And you know what? After everything I've ever seen out of Bugsy McGraw and Jimmy Valiant in their careers, it's not totally unbelievable that what I am seeing is something that would happen in real life. Bugsy and Jimmy acting like this on the streets? I'd buy it. I don't ever recall these guys ever teaming up together. The matches were probably beyond atrocious. Probably very memorable, though. Lord can only hope they don't go feuding with Paul Jones again. Good Lord. Can you imagine those matches? The Bar-Bearing and Ivan Koloff versus Bugsy McGraw and Jimmy Valiant? Ugh. I shiver at the thought. And then for our TV main event, at long last, after many months of me complaining about the ongoing rib with the Thunderfoots, the fact that we never see them work tag matches together, and that they're always broken up either doing singles matches or tag matches with other job guys, well, we finally got a Thunderfoots number 1 and 2 tag match. They were in the ring at the same time. So they are, in fact, not the same person. Bummer. And they wrestled the fabulous Freebirds. Terry Gordy and Michael Hayes, to be specific. And boy, did these Thunderfoots get thrown into the lion's den. Absolute decimation. Gordy and Hayes killed these poor fuckers. Including the finish where Hayes attempted to backdrop one of the Thunderfoots into Gordy's arms so he could give him a powerbomb. This kind of worked. And by that, I mean Gordy managed to hold on to the guy, but he couldn't really get him up into a powerbomb position necessarily. He was just sort of holding on to him over his shoulder in kind of a backbreaker position. And then Gordy just said, all right, fuck it. I'm going to drop him. And if he dies, he dies. Which David so eloquently pointed out. Well, that'd be enough to kill you. So, well, if we don't see one of the Thunderfoots on TV ever again, at least we know what happened. Turns out it was a long-term story angle to write one of them out of the company forever. Genius. All joking aside, again, I go back to what I said at the top of the program. This show is all over the place. There's so much crap happening right now. There's all this crossover talent they're trying to pick up from the UWF. They're trying to spotlight way too many people at a given time. And because of all the new talent showing up, it's almost impossible to give everybody effective showcasing. There's way too many references to feuds that are happening outside Crockett Promotions to where you can barely keep track of who's mad at who. It's a total clusterfuck right now. There's no attempt to try to even manage the talent pool. I mean, this show is only an hour in runtime. 60 minutes is not enough time to be crowding in 82 wrestlers. You know, especially when half the guys are people we haven't seen in weeks. Or again, more UWF names that are jumping ship. Between that and the Florida stuff, it's really like they're trying to run 3 different full-time territories on one show. I mean, I don't even think a 6-hour show would be enough time to effectively showcase everybody. And I didn't even really think about this until just now, but put this into perspective. Look who was missing this week. None of the Horsemen were on the show. Dusty wasn't on the show. Discount that 30-second opening VTR that was never followed up on during the program. Nikita wasn't on the show. The Midnights were not on the show. The Rock and Roll Express were not on the show. The Road Warriors were not on the show. It's like every single top star decided, fuck it. We'll take the week off. Those UWF guys can handle this one. None of the OG Crockett names were anywhere to be seen this week. That's pretty scary. The lack of top stars were really noticeable on this particular episode. Just let that stew for a little bit. Think about all those names I just mentioned. Flair, Tully, Arn, Luger, Nikita, Barry, Dusty, the Midnights, the Rock and Roll, the Road Warriors. All missing from this show. Not one single appearance. Insane. And then we have the complete opposite side of things with World Class, where we go into the show with the cold open, and it's Bill Mercer recapping the Freebirds Von Erich feud for the 87th time, including the cage match footage from Christmas Star Wars of 1982 in the infamous Freebird heel turn. And then we're told the main event for this episode, Kerry Von Erich versus Michael Hayes. which is a match I believe I've now seen forwards, backwards, sideways, inverted, and slanted at least 167 times in the last 2 months alone. But we'll come back to that. Put an asterisk next to that Hayes-Carey match. It's great. With Crockett Promotions in 1987, the story is, how many bodies can we cram in during a 2-hour show? And with World Class in 1984, the story is, yeah, we really don't have a whole lot of top talent right now, do we? Oh well. Guess it's Von Erich versus Freebird for the 4 billionth time. Literally the definition of beating a dead horse. Before we talk about that, though, their encore presentation this week was the Kevin Von Erich versus Killer Khan match, one that I believe dated back to early July. Since that point, the whole Von Erich versus Devastation Inc. story has completely shifted. Around that same point, they were starting to throw in the Freebirds, sort of doing the three-way feud with the Freebirds, kind of working the tweener role. You know, they're still pissed at the Von Erichs, but it's been pretty well established that Hayes doesn't like Akbar or his goons, so they're kind of playing the neutral middle ground party. I believe this match took place a little before they introduced the Freebirds into the equation. This was the match where, right in the middle of Killer Khan's heat, he just randomly decided to pick up David Manning and give him a body slam into oblivion. So the match got thrown out. And then I remember when the locker room cleared out, I was like, oh yeah, this was the post-match brawl that went about an hour and a half. Really not much else to add. Killer Khan still can't wrestle worth a shit. Between him and the missing link, I think it's a toss-up for candidate of worst wrestler in 1984. I'm leaning toward Killer Khan the more I think about it. At least Link could bump. Khan couldn't even do that. Yeah, this was terrible. And then we went to a special interview with Sweet Brown Sugar Skip Young, standing outside his high school grounds in Dallas. And this is pretty neat. You know, Skip gave the Wikipedia overview of his bio, talked about his background in sports, talked about being an outstanding member of the community. He was an active churchgoer, talked about his upbringing and how he was raised to follow the path of Christianity and stay out of trouble. Talked about all the friends and family he was blessed to have. And, he eventually covered the PYTs and talked about the fact that he's been around the sport for a long time. He actually broke in with the Von Erichs when they started training. And he knows the PYTs from other regions of the country. He has history with them, and he's looking to settle some beefs here in Dallas while they're under the same roof. Very simple button-down promo. Basically establishing Skip Young as sort of a relatable white meat kind of babyface. The good Christian man. I don't know. Seemed like a charitable guy. One that uses his left and right turn indicators. Yeah, this is good. No qualms. It's nice to see grown adults on a wrestling program talk and sound professional. He had some bass in his voice. That helped a lot. You know, I like when they do these pre-taped interviews. You know, helps establish new faces and get over the backstories of everybody. And from there, we went to our opening TV match. It's the Irwin brothers, Scott and Bill, versus Rock and Roll Buck Zumhoff and Chief Jewel Strongbow. First thing I wrote down about this, I don't think I've ever seen a more overdramatic setup to a collar and elbow tie-up than the one Chief Jewel Strongbow used. The amount of effort it took this man to do a simple lock up. Incredible. So they're doing this match. It's a match of some description. Watching Strongbow and Zumhofe do all their overly animated setups to their babyface flurries, it was a sight to behold. I did like the random heat spot where one of the heels took Bronco so the other could hit Strongbow on the ring apron with a bullwhip. And of course, that literally led to Buck getting the hot tag about 8 seconds later. So the heels eventually cut off Zumhofe. Strongbow literally just vanished for about 5 minutes. No clue where he went. And while the heels are doing the 2-on-1 beatdown, Strongbow hits the ring again with a leather strap and starts wailing away on the Irwin brothers for the DQ. And while Akbar tries to get in the ring to give his boys a little bit of assistance, who should then make his TV return but Gary Hart? From literally out of the void. He hits the ring. He runs off Skandar Akbar and his crew. It is, I believe, the first time we've seen Gary in Dallas since he abruptly left the company in early '83. And when this man showed up and hit the ring here, a house of fire, boy, it's like he never left. These people wet themselves in hysterics over the sight of seeing Gary Hart back on TV. And, well, he got a follow-up interview with Bill Mercer to kind of explain his absence and why he's back. His kayfabe explanation was, I had other business to attend to. The shoot explanation was, I got fucked over my contract. But he says he's back to finish business with Skandar Akbar, picking up where he left off, saying he's sick and tired of this guy running around wearing what looks like his mother's nightgown. And, well, they kind of set that into motion. You know, for the life of me, I can't recall if Gary Hart actually left the territory as a heel. Be that as it may, he was definitely a babyface here. Jumping in feet first with the Akbar program, which should be intriguing. I wonder if they get the Great Kabuki back. Because last time we saw him in Dallas, I think he was a babyface too. But he only popped in for maybe a taping or two, and then he was gone again. I don't know. Maybe they'll reunite him with Gary and send them a Devastation Inc. That's pure conjecture. I actually don't recall if Kabuki ever ends up coming back to Dallas, but going by history, it seemed like a likely option. From there, we go back to the ring for the quote-unquote official debut of Jake the Snake Roberts in World Class, which is technically not true because we've seen Jake Roberts in Dallas under a different gimmick. If y'all remember the Texan, that might ring a bell. But here he was just plain old Jake Roberts. He wrestled Mike Gallagher. Or should I say he demolished Mike Gallagher. Here's everything I wrote down. It goes about 1 minute. Jake hits Mike with his patented DDT, which Bill Mercer referred to as some type of new suplex. So apparently he hadn't already been smart enough to the move. Boy, did Mercer have much to learn. And, well, when it comes to the DDT, many have used it. Many actually used it as a finisher throughout their careers. I still think Jake Roberts had one of the best looking DDTs out of anybody. Like the way he snapped that thing on and delivered it with such precision. Like no one hit the DDT like Roberts did during this period. And he never hurt anybody. It looked brutal. Always looked devastating. But he always protected whoever he was giving that move to. It was a great debut. He didn't get paid by the hour. It's kind of similar to the work I saw him do in Mid-South about a year later. That's actually some of the first bit of footage I ever recall seeing of Jake Roberts. His work in Mid-South right up until the point he left for the WWF a couple years later. But I know he sticks around World Class for a little bit before we see him head off to work for Watts in '85. So, we'll definitely enjoy the Jake Roberts content while we can. Can't remember what they program him with, but that's why we're along for the ride. To see what happens. And then we get the TV main event. What was originally scheduled to be Kerry versus Hayes has now been changed to Kerry versus Gordy due to travel issues for Hayes. A likely story. And, well, in addition to the last-minute change in personnel, this also randomly became a lumberjack match, which I do not recall Mercer ever mentioning in the cold open, but, sure, we'll go with that. It was a pretty patterned lumberjack match. They tried to do the 50-50 split with the babyface and heel lumberjacks on the floor, so anytime Gordy went out, the babyfaces would target him, and vice versa with Kerry. I always like Gordy's over-dramatic selling. He got tossed out early on here, and to show how angry he was, he then tried to reach over the top rope to grab some of the lumberjacks and pull them into the ring. And it looked like he legitimately almost lost his footing and fell out to the floor. It actually looked like Kerry had to grab his ankle for a shoot and then pull him over the top rope. He should have just let Gordy crash and burn. Would have been an epic spot. But Gordy worked over Kerry for a while. I like the point where they just randomly decided to have a pile driver exchange. Just casually hitting back and forth pile drivers for near falls like it's nothing. All that complaining I've ever done about how everybody totally killed the pile driver spot because it's never a finish. Little did I know that move was already buried and ruined by the early 80s. You got guys using it as a random spot in a match. Kerry Von Erich and Terry Gordy. Here on World Class in 1984 is just hitting pile drivers. Kicking out, totally exposing the business. No problem. Andy Kaufman would have been ashamed. So eventually Gordy locked in the Oriental Spike. And right as Kerry's about to fade, here comes Killer Khan to hit the ring for the disqualification. At which point all the lumberjacks hit the ring for the proverbial brawl. And it basically just turned into a glorified Royal Rumble where the babyfaces and heels are in various parts of the ring throwing punches. Finally, all the babyfaces clear the ring. And that was kind of it. A kind of nothing match overall. Underwhelming, to say the least. I don't even know why the lumberjacks were even needed for this thing if it was just going to be a DQ finish. Was Killer Khan even a lumberjack? I don't recall seeing him out on the floor at any point. I think he just ran in from the back. Well, in any case, the show was mid. Sort of a back to normalcy episode in the sense that we didn't have a whole lot of Crash TV stuff going on. A little bit of chaos here and there strewn in with the afterbirth angles. The Gary Hart return was probably the most notable part. And the Jake Roberts debut was kind of cool. Main event was okay right up until the lame DQ finish. But it's just kind of another one of those episodes where a few things happened. Not a whole lot of story advancement. The roster rotation is very minimal, especially in the main event picture. You got a couple things going on here and there that are noteworthy, but everything else is just kind of blech. It's not like the Crockett TV shows where I'm constantly asking, what the fuck is going on and who are they pushing? The show right now in the summer of late 84 for World Class, it's all about establishing some new faces where they can. They're trying to get some new people over, but a lot of it is just rehashing the same old tired Von Erich Freebird feud. And then they just kind of fill in the gaps as needed. I'm more or less counting down the days until we get Jim Cornette and the Midnights debuting. Because at least I know there will be some quality promos upcoming. But that's pretty much all there is to that show. And that's pretty much all there is to this show. The end of the podcast. Alright, so I was playing around with a couple things. Trying to figure out how I wanted to go about this Monday episode. Because there's going to be a lot to talk about this weekend. We've got the Wembley show we're going to talk about. We're going to do the retro... Well, actually, no, there's no Retro Raw show, so we'll remove that from the equation. But we are going to talk about the SummerSlam 94 pay-per-view. And it was a toss-up between Collision and SmackDown. Apparently, they already did the pre-tape for the Collision show, so spoilers have been out. I haven't read anything yet. More than likely, though, I'm probably going to do the SmackDown recap because I don't really know if there's anything worth talking about on the Collision show. It's right before the Wembley show. I don't think anything noteworthy is really going to happen, so we might just skip a week and we'll kind of go back to the formula of next week. But that's probably what it'll be for the Monday show. So we'll have the All-In pay-per-view, we'll have the SummerSlam 94 pay-per-view, and we'll go over the highlights and lowlights of SmackDown. So you can pretty much expect that. And we'll be back on Monday. As always, make sure you guys subscribe, comment, like the show. Come check us out every Monday and Friday on either YouTube or Rumble for new content. And we will reconvene this weekend. That is all. My brain malfunctioned. I have no outro. Bye. Peace. Take care. Goodbye.